In 1818, famous writer Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein, the story of a creature created from human parts. However, she couldn't tell the whole story and died before finishing it. Now in the afterlife, she's eager to write what is missing. In Chicago in 1936, Ida is having a bad time at a party. She kisses another girl and eats an oyster just because her group forces her to, and she ends up puking. In this moment of weakness, something makes her body snap, and Ida hears Mary's voice in her head. With another crack of her body, Mary possesses Ida, and the group is surprised to hear her speak in an English accent. While reciting purple prose, Ida climbs on the table and tries to flirt with a man. When the others try to calm her down, Ida begins to scream. Her friends remind her that crime boss Lupino is watching, so Ida points at him and calls him the real monster. Then she starts making a scene, saying weird things about the stuff the dead remembers. Lupino orders his henchmen James and Clyde to kick her out, so the duo drags Ida while she keeps yelling stuff at Lupino. Outside, Ida continues her rambling, so James slaps her, and Ida slaps him in return. When James slaps her again, Clyde has to separate them. However, since Ida keeps talking weirdly, Clyde ends up slapping her too. She then makes fun of James' groin, causing him to punch her. Clyde thinks she's possessed, so he sends James to get a doctor or a priest. Still controlled by Mary, Ira announces that a sequel to Frankenstein is coming and that many truths will be revealed. Clyde is getting really creeped out by her, so he pushes her down the stairs. Her leg breaks as she rolls down the steps before she lands at the bottom, instantly dying. The next day, Dr. Cornelia is visited by a strange man who claims to be the creature from Mary's story. Cornelia thinks it's a prank and makes him remove his hat and scarf, so she sees his monstrous face. A terrified Cornelia tries to run away, but Frank stops her when he points out that he's the one who has been writing to her for the past few months. Cornelia agrees to see him and shakes his hand before studying his body, which she's very impressed by. Frank explains he's been following Cornelia's work on reanimation, so he wants her to build him a bride. Their discussion is interrupted when the assistant Greta comes in and screams at the sight of Frank. After Greta leaves in fear, Frank explains how lonely he is, so Cornelia convinces him to stay in the institute to work things out. In the evening, Frank goes to the theater to watch a movie with his favorite actor Ronnie. He loves the romantic scenes, so he repeats the dialogue and sings along, even copying the dance moves. He only shuts up because a man complains about his noise. Frank then imagines himself in the movie. The next day, Cornelia freaks out when Frank tells her he wants her to dig up bodies and chop them into pieces to create his bride. When Cornelia makes fun of the idea, Frank snaps and yells at her. He admits that when they shook hands yesterday, it was the first time someone touched him. He also says he thought she was a mad scientist and wonders if she isn't curious. As she laughs, Cornelia finally agrees to help. That night, Cornelia and Frank go to the cemetery and dig up a recently buried body. When they return to the institute, Frank accidentally breaks a vase on his way upstairs. The noise alerts Greta, who sees them with the body. In the lab, Cornelia starts getting all the machines ready while Frank admires the body, which turns out to be Ida. He starts having doubts because Ida is too beautiful for him and says they should do this tomorrow. At that moment, Greta tries to look inside the lab, so Cornelia rushes to kick her out and locks the door. She then explains she can't have a body around the lab, so they must do this now or never. Once Ida is connected to the machines, Cornelia starts turning them on. Frank is so nervous that he gets an anxiety attack, so Cornelia helps him calm down and they pull the final lever together. Ida's body is filled with a special chemical compound as the machine's bulbs break because of the great amount of electricity used by the reanimation. A ball of energy enters the body and with a loud groan, she's finally alive again. Suddenly Ida starts coughing up the compound and Cornelia tells Frank that this is his bride. Ida responds with some nonsense before concluding she should go home. When she tries to stand up, she immediately loses balance and falls. Frank tries to help her, but Ida doesn't want to be touched. Cornelia notices that Ida's leg isn't well, but Ida claims she isn't in pain. She realizes she doesn't remember anything from before her death and Frank theorizes she was in an accident. They convince her to spend the night in the institute to rest, and Cornelia sends Frank away so she can check Ida's broken leg with some privacy. While Frank watches another movie, Cornelia puts a brace on the broken leg. Ida asks what the deal is with Frank, so Cornelia tells her that she's his bride. Ida protests, saying she doesn't even remember the guy. Sometime later, Ida finds herself pushed against a window and hears a voice talking to her. It's Mary, who calls her another monster as Ida floats away from the window. Ida asks Mary for help to get her memories back, but Mary says no. When Ida touches a bulb, it explodes and makes her fall, but at that moment she wakes up in the lab. Frank is sleeping on the floor, so Ida blows on his face to wake him up. However, he thinks he's being attacked and screams as he punches her in the eye. When he realizes what he did, he immediately apologizes. Then he grabs an umbrella and does the dance from the movie to appear more friendly. Ida remembers Cornelia locking the door, so Frank explains he entered through the window. Their conversation is interrupted by Cornelia, who notices that the window bulb is broken. During breakfast, Ida refuses to eat. Cornelia offers various ideas, such as getting her new clothes or finding a way to wash off the compound stains. Ida says no to everything and begins throwing things on the floor, insisting that she only wants to leave. Since Cornelia refuses to unlock the doors, Ida and Frank escape by climbing through the window. They go together to the theater and Frank shares trivia about Ronnie. Afterward, Ida takes Frank to a club, where she dances in the weirdest way. She wants Frank to dance with her, but he prefers to watch from afar. He imagines her wearing a nice dress and dancing properly with Ronnie. In the bathroom, Ida looks at herself in the mirror and notices her tongue is stained as well. Another woman volunteers to help her with some makeup. Then Ida returns to the dance floor while Frank keeps drinking at the table. Soon Ida manages to get a proper dance partner, however his dirty dancing soon turns into improper touching, and his friend joins him to touch her too. Ida realizes what's happening and pushes them off, but the men refuse to let go. Ida screams and says she isn't afraid of Lupino and her men, causing the guys to get violent. Frank immediately comes to her rescue and takes her away. Outside the club, the guys follow Ida and Frank, pushing them and mocking them while the couple tries to ignore them. They hit Frank and make him fall, taking the chance to pull Ida away from them. They try to take advantage of her again, so she bites a man's face and tries to run, but they make her fall too. A furious Frank grabs one of the men and continuously pounds his face on the wall until he's dead. Then he throws the second man to the ground and steps on his head until he's dead too. Suddenly a light flashes behind them, indicating someone has taken pictures of them. However, the mysterious photographer runs away before the couple can see them. Soon the police sirens can be heard, so the couple runs back to the institute. Frank tells Ida to go away since he doesn't want to get her in trouble, then he climbs the fence to enter his room through the window. After grabbing his things, Frank goes back outside, only to find Ida still there. He tells her that an angry mob will come after him, which has already happened before, so she should go home. Ida doesn't know where her home even is, so she takes his hand and they run away together. In a new dream, Ida sees her head in a jar and feels like she can't breathe. Mary mocks her for not remembering her name but also tells her to find it. At that moment Frank wakes her up, revealing they've sneaked onto a moving train. Moments later the train stops and Frank hears the cops searching for them, so the couple quickly hides behind some boxes. While they wait, Frank shows Ida a newspaper article he kept because it's about Ronnie. They discuss movies and Ida starts singing as the train takes off again. Frank tries to shut her up but it's too late. A cop hears her and comes back. The couple tries to hide again but the officer can see Frank, so he comes out. The cop is horrified to see Frank's face and tries to open fire, however Ida pushes him off the train and he breaks his neck on the rails. In the morning, Detective Jake and his assistant Myrna are given the case of the bodies outside the club. They receive the pictures together with some information. Frank was at the theater every day, while Ida is known for mouthing off to a crime boss. Eventually the couple reaches New York, and Frank jumps into a fountain to gather coins. Then they hide in an abandoned building and Ida finds a newspaper that talks about Frank. She notices they call her his bride, so she wants to know her actual name. Frank says her name is Penelope Rogers, so she changes it to Penelope Frankenstein since she's supposed to be his bride. Then Ida says they should get naughty and starts touching Frank, who feels very uncomfortable and quickly stops her. The following day Jake and Myrna find the body on the tracks. The local cops don't believe the creatures are connected to this because everyone would have noticed two monstrous looking people, but Myrna finds the Ronnie article on the ground. She shows it to Jake during lunch and they agree to go to New York. Meanwhile Ida asks Frank what their intimacy was like before the accident, so Frank says it was amazing. She also wonders if the cop is okay and Frank says he is, not wanting her to carry the guilt of killing. Suddenly Frank has an anxiety attack and realizes his newspaper article is missing. To calm down, he needs to go to the movies. At the theater, Jake and Myrna are waiting to catch the creatures. Frank steals a pretzel from a cart and tells Ida that it's her favorite. He wants to watch the same Ronnie movie, but Ida is tired of it and drags him into a different theater, so the detective doesn't see them. While they try to watch the movie, Ida notices a couple in front of them getting dirty. The woman doesn't really want to do this in public, so Ida attacks the boyfriend and reminds him what consent is. The guy notices the couple's faces and calls them monsters, realizing they're the murderers from the news. The whole crowd panics, so Frank drags Ida out of the theater. When Jake and Myrna see people running in panic, they rush to investigate. The crowd chases after Ida and Frank, who turn around the corner only to find the way blocked by a police car. They enter a random building to escape and run through a kitchen before reaching a fancy party. The couple grabs some trays to pretend to be waiters while eating some of the food. Frank tries to sneak around carefully until he discovers that Ronnie is at the party too. He immediately approaches him and tells him he's a huge fan because around 20 years ago, Ronnie smiled at him and made him feel less alone. Frank says he's survived all this time, thanks to Ronnie, who makes a joke before going back to his friends. Furious over being ignored, Frank drops the tray and starts dancing like in the movie. Ida joins him on the dance floor and Mary possesses the crowd to make them dance too. While people's moves get dirty, Frank eats a glass of champagne and spits it like a fountain. At that moment the cops burst into the party. Ida and Jake stare in shock because they can recognize each other. A cop then punches Frank, who immediately hits him back and makes him drop the gun. When the officers surround Frank, Ida grabs the gun and makes everyone back off. She tells the police to let Frank go and threatens to shoot Ronnie. When Ronnie tries to apologize, Ida explains he isn't the problem. She explains that Lupino has the police in his pocket and lists all the women he's killed. When someone tries to sneak out through the back door, Ida shoots at the wall to make them stop. As she talks against corruption and all the dead women that didn't get justice, an officer tries to approach Ida from behind. She's startled and shoots him down. Frank uses the distraction to bring down the chandelier, making it crash on the floor while the crowd panics. In the darkness, Frank and Ida can run away unnoticed. On the street, Ida feels bad about shooting a man. However, Frank is proud of her and explains this is what they have to do to survive. They start kissing and are interrupted by Jake, who doesn't dare to shoot Ida. The creatures laugh at him before running away. Later the cops find the abandoned building, but the creatures aren't there. They're hiding in a barn, where they finally get dirty. Afterward they steal a car and leave the city. In the next town, they have lots of fun together in various ways, like going to the movies and getting a tattoo. They keep getting money by going fountain diving. Eventually Cornelia sees the couple on the news. Because of her speech at the party, Ida becomes a symbol of female revolution, and soon women are trying to rebel all over the country. They paint their faces and tongues like Ida and cause chaos on the streets. The news also reaches Lupino, who scolds Clyde and James for not doing their job right. James swears that they did kill Ida, so Lupino pulls out his gun and shoots him in the head. Then he tells Clyde to kill Ida for good and bring him back her tongue. It turns out he has many jars with the tongues of his victims. Sometime later, Myrna tells Jake that the creatures were last seen in Fredonia. Before they continue their search, Myrna wants to know why Jake seemed to recognize Idaho, however Jake pretends he doesn't know anything. Myrna then points at all the towns where the creatures were seen and concludes they've been visiting the places from Ronnie's movies. Considering their last location, she theorizes they'll go to Niagara Falls next. At the same time, the creatures are indeed going to Niagara Falls and Frank tells Ida about the corresponding movie. When Ida asks about their engagement, Frank pretends they had a wonderful proposal and makes up a whole story. At that moment a police car starts following them. Ida stops the car and Frank covers his face with his scarf, so when the cop approaches them, Ida tells him that Frank is her sick uncle. Since she doesn't have her papers, the cop makes her step out and pats her down while touching her inappropriately and calling her slurs. When the officer comes too close and tries to take advantage of her, Frank shoots him through the window. Then Ida jumps on him and tries to rip his tongue off. A second cop comes out of his car and shoots Ida in the shoulder, so Frank kills him with a shot to the head. Then Ida bites the first officer's tongue to finish ripping it off and steals his gun. The couple escapes by running into the woods. In the evening, Ida and Frank make it to the next town and hide in another abandoned building. The detectives and Clyde are in the same town looking for them. Ida struggles with what she did earlier and hates how Mary keeps pushing her into doing crazy things. As she starts talking nonsense again, she leaves the building and shoots at the sky. James hears the noise and follows it until he finds the creatures, but Ida points her gun at him and makes him drop his weapon. James tells them that they're coming for them and swears he just wants to help because he knows Ida was forced into this. He blames himself for this and apologizes. At that moment Myrna also shows up and shoots Frank. James begs everyone to behave and calls Ida by her real name, but Ida doesn't like it and shoots him. She calls him a crooked cop and says he made a mistake by getting dirty with his witnesses. Then she runs away with Frank. Soon the police sirens can be heard in the area. The creatures steal a new car while Frank asks who James was, but Ida says she doesn't remember. In the morning, Myrna asks James about Ida and he breaks down, saying he thought she was dead. He explains that Ida was one of the many escorts involved in the Lupino case. These women worked with gangsters to gather information and took it to the police. When the cops were about to catch Lupino, they were forced to close the case. Ida had been furious about this and showed up at James' office to beg him to keep the case open. They ended up getting naughty. Since James is one of the bribed cops, he didn't even try to help her. Soon the other girls were found dead without their tongues. James feels guilty, so he's already called his boss to resign and now gives Myrna his badge. This whole conversation is overheard by Clyde. In the middle of the road, Ida stops the car because Frank isn't breathing right and his bullet wound keeps bleeding. She turns the car around, knowing exactly where to take him. Minutes later, Myrna and James are told that the creatures were seen at a gas station near Indiana. James asks Myrna to stop the other cops from killing Ida. In the evening the cops question the people at the gas station, but Myrna goes to the nearest movie theater. Soon Frank and Ida arrive, but instead of paying attention to the movie, Frank finally tells Ida that he didn't know her before reviving her. Myrna sneaks around the car and hears Frank explain that he dug Ida up from her grave. A very upset Ida leaves the car to throw up. Frank follows her and tells her they could start a new life together. Ida doesn't feel comfortable with her name and she decides she should only be known as the bride. Frank then tells her he loves her and licks her skin before proposing to her. While Myrna comes closer and Clyde also shows up, Ida turns Frank down, saying she's nobody's bride. Frank starts laughing, only to drop dead when Clyde shoots him in the head. As the cops surround them, Ida screams in grief and shoots randomly before dragging Frank back into the car. She hits another vehicle when she takes off but still manages to drive away. The police cars catch up to her on the road and open fire. Ida keeps driving as fast as possible, only to see another police car coming in the opposite direction. She decides to turn off the lights and drive off the road to hide in the tall grass. Eventually she stops the car and checks on Frank, who is definitely dead. Then she talks to Mary, who congratulates her for becoming the bride. A few hours later, Ida arrives at the institute and asks Cornelia to revive him. Myrna follows Ida's tracks and sneaks into the institute too, unaware that Clyde is following her. Cornelia explains she can't revive Frank, so Ida points her gun at her and admits she loves him. While the cops park outside, Cornelia reveals that her husband died and she tried to revive him, but he came back with no memories and was behaving strangely. She had no choice but to kill him. When Clyde sees an opening, he comes out of hiding and shoots Ida several times. At that moment the cops burst in and open fire too. Cornelia screams in horror as she watches Ida get hit with dozens of bullets before falling dead on top of Frank. Myrna has to yell at the cops multiple times before she manages to make them stop. Afterward, Myrna tells the cops to close the perimeter and go after Clyde, who is escaping through the fire escape. The officers are confused, so Myrna shows them James' badge to establish authority. After the cops leave, Myrna tells Cornelia that she'll wait outside and she can take as long as she needs. Greta compares the situation to Romeo and Juliet and tells Cornelia to rest, but Cornelia refuses. Outside, the cops capture Clyde while Myrna watches the institute's roof, where electricity is glowing brightly. On the table, Frank and Ida move again to hold hands. Meanwhile, James hands Lupino to the rebel women, who can finally have their revenge. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you can watch more videos like this. Thanks for watching.